All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kristin Schooley. This is Aaron Wilkerson, and we are so excited that you are here today. We know it's right after lunch, so we will do our best to keep you guys awake and alert. But we are so excited to share with you LCG's journey to self-service analytics. So over the course of the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about who we are, what we do, what our company is about, and how we have been able to build a data-rich self-service analytic culture. One point before Aaron gets started with us is we most certainly want to make this interactive. So if at any time you have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand. No need to wait till the end of the presentation. Aaron?
All right, like she said, thanks everyone for being here. I acknowledge this after lunch, so we're going to do our best to make this a little lively. Chris and I were talking about, in years past, they used to have these large plated events with fried foods, mac and cheese, and full desserts. So luckily this year is a little bit light, so hopefully not too many people doze off. Like I said, thanks for joining us. So talking through our agenda, so we talked a little about the company we work at, Learning Care Group, kind of talking through our self-service function, how it came about. Thinking about our data management strategy, just the history of it, how do we think about reporting, some of the core functions of our groups, roles and responsibilities around how our groups interact with each other, and kind of what we're doing today. And then, can't talk about data without tools, so we will talk a little bit about just what some of the tools we're currently using and plan to be using, along with the kind of back-end data warehouse, front-end reporting, and then some of the things we're doing with data catalog, and then just a quick mention of just lessons learned through this process. So that's what we'll be talking about today.
All right, so who is Learning Care Group? How many people maybe know somebody or maybe yourself, you send a child to Child Time, Tutor Time, or Everbrook Academy here in the Metro Detroit area? Anyone? All right, we got one. Got two. All right, so we are actually the second largest early childhood care provider in the United States. We operate over 1,000 daycare centers in 39 states under 10 unique brands. So as I mentioned, here in Metro Detroit, you're gonna see, and throughout Michigan, you're gonna see Child Time, Tutor Time, and Everbrook Academy. La Petite is one of our largest brands in most of our states. And then we also just acquired UGrow in Pennsylvania. We have a Montessori line. So we have a lot of different schools, use cases. We take children from 6 weeks old to 12 years old. We're actually headquartered in Novi, Michigan. So we have about 450 employees who work at what we call Support Central, which is our headquarters. So we've got about 450 people who support those 1,000 schools. But we have over 21,000 employees, mostly teachers. We have the license capacity to serve 150,000 children. And we are on a mission to become number one.
And I'll quickly talk about the structural organization. So if you think about the value proposition of the company, it's really hones in on that teacher-child relationship. So the value that the company provides to the community is really through our schools. So the bottom left corner shows where you think about revenue generated essentially is through our schools. And then on the left-hand side, we have a field structure. So those 1,000 locations are typically run by a school director or a principal, and then they're supported through a hierarchy structure. So schools report to a district reports to a region, to a division, and we have field operations leadership. And then the support central function, where Chris and I sit in, that's mainly around supporting our schools. So everything that we do on a daily basis, when we talk about data, self-service, analytics, it's all about really supporting our schools and trying to visualize and show through data just our ability to enhance the child experience, to enhance that teacher-child relationship and support of our organization. So kind of really quick snapshot of kind of how our organization functions, because really it's about the school, and we're all supporting that and showing information about that school relationship.
So the history of our teams and why it's so important about where we are today regarding our teams. So like most companies, prior to the pandemic, we really had a very structured enterprise reporting that was housed within finance. Like most companies, we were using Excel for most of our reporting. And then around 2016, 2017, which we're going to get a little bit more in depth in, we started to adopt Microsoft Power BI and really went on a journey about how we would instill Microsoft Power BI to our organization. In order to get there, we started a really strong relationship with IT. So again, part of this in background is knowing is my team actually sits in finance, Aaron's team sits in IT, and it's a huge component as to why we're able to work so well together across the organization. So as mentioned, with the help of IT, we implemented Power BI and really started our journey towards self-service analytics. What we didn't know was coming then was the pandemic.
And then, reporting is still a pretty big component of how data is moved around the organization. So I want to talk really quickly around just the evolution of that. So I started the company in 2017. I believe Kristin started in 2020. So the backbone of the data is through our data warehouse. So all the data that's moved around the company, like about good 80 or 90% of that, really kind of comes from source systems to a data warehouse, and that's essentially pushed and moved around the organization. So that was originally built, 2009, 2010 was first built. At that time, there wasn't really many tools used for the organization, so a lot of it was distributing data, sending out flat files, connecting using Excel spreadsheets. So a couple years before I joined, we were using this tool called Information Builder's Web Focus. So that was kind of the first foray into really getting into reporting. I would say that when I first joined, we were heavily using Web Focus, and I think we talk about self-service, there were some challenges because it was very much a IT developer-centric application where we didn't really have end users building reports. It was really, a request would come in, IT would build out the reports or build out a dashboard, and we would push it out to the organization. Of course, the challenge is, with our group, we had, 2 or 3 total developers, one of them focused on reporting, so very much difficult to really expand out reporting around the organization to really make it enterprise. So I started working, when I first started joining the company, we really got into Power BI. So really, Power BI became enterprise around 2018. So what we found is that it was a much more efficient tool at really building reports quickly, distributing. So at that time, Microsoft was still building the application. So we were kind of along the journey with Microsoft as they build out Power BI. So really 2018 is when we saw it really explode because it was fast, efficient to build reports. It was easy to administer, and we were using their service providers. So there wasn't any back-end servers to build. It was really distributing it through their cloud application in the Power BI service. And then we'll talk about kind of our groups. Essentially, our groups were kind of formed officially in 2020 when we kind of built out our self-service capability. And then 2021 is when we really kind of continued to move forward. So we got rid of Web Focus because of all the different challenges I talked about, really pushed Power BI as the enterprise tool for our analytics and self-service capabilities. And then we'll talk a little bit later, really push towards the data catalog, because as our teams work together, as we work with the business, there's still a huge need around how to commonize terms, glossaries, and really put together that catalog for lineage.
So just to sort of give an idea about what our reporting looked like pre-pandemic, during, and now here is what we call post-pandemic. So we operate, our fiscal calendar is July to June, since we are a school organization. We have a reporting week. Our fiscal weeks go from Saturday to Friday. Why that's important is on Saturday, our data warehouse systems refresh over the weekend, and then when our employees come in on Monday, they get the most up-to-date information from the last fiscal week. So prior to the pre-pandemic, what we were most proud of is that we actually had reporting that could give you a snapshot of exactly what was happening the prior week, which was, it's 2019, 2020. It's pretty cool at the time, right? And then what would happen is one of the things we started to build for more of a real-time analytics is being in childhood or childcare, licensing is huge. So for instance, our infant rooms usually, for the most part, have a 1-to-4 ratio. 1 teacher for every 4 students or every 4 infants. And so we would have reporting showing child counts by hour, and this was huge. So we were able to see across the organization, we operate in all 4 time zones, so we could see as early as 6 a.m. Eastern, all the way through when people would pick their kids up at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And we thought we were cutting edge at that point. And then the pandemic happened. And so we joke about it today, but Aaron and I, along with a selected group, ended up on what we call the COVID-19 reporting team. Every day at 4:30 p.m., we would meet virtually, and we would say, okay, in your meetings today, what did you hear? As you can imagine, through the pandemic, with a lot of the stay-home orders, a lot of families couldn't send their children to school. So where we saw schools operate would be around hospitals or certain areas. But here in the state of Michigan, most of our schools actually closed, not because of COVID exposures, but because of the stay-home order. Parents couldn't send their children. Why this became important is with school closures, we needed to understand real time, how do we operate, what employees do we need, and how do we move forward? And it was really in that moment, so we say early pandemic, I'm talking March 2020, around July 2020 is when we started to really open up most of our schools again. We realized in that moment we needed real time. And as the previous slide said, it's really around the summer of 2020 our teams formed. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but in a post-pandemic, so late 2020 to current, what leadership realized is that we needed to understand what restoration looked like. How do we bring families back to our schools? Our number one rule is no one gets hurt. If a parent goes to drop their child off, they expect to pick them up and no one's gonna get hurt, right? So we gotta make sure that we're creating safe environments. We report on all of that. Are they getting a quality education? We report on that. What's our growth pillars and how do we move forward? And then again, how do we get back to those pre-pandemic levels?
Okay. So as we continue, like if you talk about evolution, kind of during the pandemic, it brought about showing the importance of data, how much it means to organizations. Kind of Kristin mentioned, there's a lot more conversations around how do we get more data, how do we get data faster, because as you talk about, having close to 1,000 locations, during the pandemic, it was what the heck's going on like right now? Like how many kids do we have? Are parents bringing their kids? Like what are the numbers, enrollments looking like? So it really brought about the importance of data. So we started to kind of put together just the core components around really what does a enterprise data function look like from a function. It's not necessarily teams talking about, but it's really more of a functions around, given the value of data, how should we really kind of think about organizing ourselves from like, what are the key functionalities? Because like as we start to grow and we ask for more resources, we should be aligned to what does the business need of us and our different functions to really have, to show the value of data. Like how do we align to our business strategy to make sure we're aligned and we have a core data strategy that shows, the problems we're trying to face, the approach we're trying to do in the actual next steps. Data governance around policies and procedures. So, my group's responsible for this, Kristin's group's responsible for this. We have data sources who provide information. You have customers, you have data producers. So data governance is a big one around just understanding policies and procedures. And you have data management of how do we physically move data around the organization. So that's important. And I would say a lot of these things we were doing, but it wasn't really documented or shown or really shown to say like, okay, these are the core functions that are going on. And of course, last, what Kristin's group really does is kind of the data, really the delivery of it. So given that we're aligned, we have policy and procedures, we move the data, how do we actually get it in the hands of our customers at the speed in which that they're looking for to make business decisions from the CEO all the way down to our school level? So this kind of lays out kind of those core functions that we kind of put together because we were trying to really figure out the value proposition of our teams and kind of how our teams work with each other.
And so to just kind of follow up on that slide, back in the summer of 2020, when our teams were forming, this is really the chart that we were really going by. So a BI and Analytics Steering Committee was formed by leadership. And then from there was two teams formed. So my team is the BI and data delivery, and Aaron's team is that data management and data governance. And again, my team resides in finance, and Aaron's team resides in IT. And that's really strategic in the sense that we've got two different business units working together to really understand the data from two different perspectives. That creates a checks and balance. Is also some auditing capabilities. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a list of some of the stuff that with the time we started to solve for. It has grown quite a bit. But I think the big things are really how do we get executive leadership to really buy into what we're doing and the ownership. This morning, the keynote speaker, Jan, she started talking about building trust. And during her presentation, I couldn't help but think at that moment, ELT at Learning Care Group really put trust in us to get this done. And they made it a priority. And then making sure that it is a centralized creation. And then how do we really become stronger and faster? How do we get our internal customers, which ultimately are the school directors, the information they need to operate? And then what can we automate? What can we do? And how we're going to do going forward. And then the last bullet is actually one that we've not implemented yet, and that is the data science. So that is something that's still future thinking. As we build this has been an almost 2-year journey, and so the data science is the next component.
So I think the last 2 slides really lay out kind of the charter and kind of how we really got that executive buy-in, given just the importance of that information. Like Kristin mentioned, like we have great relationships with our executive team where they're very approachable. We can kind of go to them. They can feel free to come to us with questions they have around data. We can ask them about clarification. So I think those 2 last slides talk to kind of how we built our kind of function. So one will kind of talk about just kind of what we're looking at today. So I think the beauty of the previous slides is that to show the importance, it helped us justify more resources. So for me, I was able to bring on some additional resources. So it really allow us to let us grow into those different functional areas. When we talk about data governance, actually having resources who are more responsible for data cataloging, business glossary, data lineage. Because before, if you have 2 people, there's a lot of things you just can't do with 2 versus 6 people that I have right now. So really allows us to kind of dig into the core, kind of what our team does. So data pipelines, so pulling data from a source system to a target state, which is generally our data warehouse. The usage of data, so how do we look at data usage around what reports are being used and tie the lineage to that and security of it. Like I said, data governance, so how do we make sure that we understand who's using the data for what purpose, data quality, how do we make sure that the data matches what the expectations are, occasional audits, so we think about just compliancing just to make sure that no one has access to data that they shouldn't have, and to make sure that like I said, data meets the expectation around row counts and things like that. And then, like I said, it goes back to the lineage around being able to, because I think most of the questions we get is, what data sources do we have and who's using it? So I think with more folks on our team, we're really still starting to build out this capability, because of course it takes time. I mean, it's not you get more people and all of a sudden everyone's perfect. It's really just managing the resources and making sure that we align to the core goals around true data management, data governance, and figuring out roles and responsibilities and how the team interacts with each other.
And then from the business intelligence side on my team, we run somewhat lean. I have 3 analysts and then my leader. So I think what we pride ourselves the most in is that there are 5 of us. Again, that's 5 of us supporting 1,000 schools, and obviously we have a ton of help to get there. But how we operate is each analyst has a specific partnership. So if I skip down to the last bullet, I think that's probably the most important. So one of the analysts on the team has a direct relationship with finance and operations. Another one has a direct relationship with human resources, legal, and government relations. And then the other analyst has a direct relationship with marketing. The reason this is so important is our structure is the analysts are meeting sometimes on a weekly basis with their customers, sometimes it's biweekly, and it's really asking kind of 2 questions. How's your reporting going? And we'll get to in a second how we actually structure the reporting. But then I think the more important question is, what reports did we build for you that you haven't been using? We do actually track usage. We don't believe in build it and forget it. If we put something out there and you're not using it, we want to understand why. Not because we're upset that you're not using it, but did it not go what your expectation was? And then having the cross-functional relationships really allows us to start finding insights between. So for instance, one of our business units that we help manage is our education team. The education team has a hypothesis that the value of our education provides family satisfaction and teacher satisfaction. And in order to get those analytics, then we've got to start looking at teacher retention, so that's a human resource metric, as well as family satisfaction, which is a marketing. And so very quickly you start to see all the intricacies that go together, which is why the team really, we meet weekly and we're just constantly having conversations about what are we learning? And I think that that's probably the most powerful, is because we aren't here about, what kind of flashy dashboards can we build you? It's more about what are you using? Sometimes simple is best, what's going on, and how can we make it better? So a couple things is, like I said before, we use Power BI. We usually connect to our data warehouse. So that's why Aaron and I are such best friends, because without our teams not working together, this would not happen. And then really trying to understand questions that the business units are answering or asking. So I think one thing that's really important too is Business units such as finance tend to have more sophisticated analytics built in. This is kind of by the nature of who they are. So there are certain business units that if they already have an analytical team, we usually just partner with them to help them. And if it's more enterprise level, then we take it on. But other departments such as HR, prior to 2020, we didn't have a lot of HR reporting. Now we are able to really partner with them and start telling our employee life cycle. So what's the turnover, what's employee satisfaction, and then it gets back to the questions that other departments are answering. So when Aaron and I were putting these slides together, I think we had a moment where we paused and we were like, man, we've really come a long way in 2 years. At the time, it didn't seem like it. We just stepped in and got it done. But 2 years ago, this relationship didn't exist, which is really cool today.
Yeah, and I think the key to that is just the partnership. I mean, my team and Kristin's team work together pretty closely where at least once or twice a week we have dialogue around reporting requests, like data requests. You know, Kristin sends me emails saying, hey, do we have this in the data warehouse? And I usually say yes or no. If it's no, when can I get it? And it's like a quarter past never because our backlog is pretty full. But I think it's a great relationship we've kind of found just kind of working together pretty closely. And also it allows us to do more and scale just because before we did this, a lot of that sat really within my team and like there's only so much we can do. So I think having another team that's able to do so much more allows us to kind of provide just a lot of value to organization. I mean, even our COO talks about just, you know, he comes from a retail background, but he's never seen as much data available to organization. I think one time he said, you know, every single question I can ever ask, like we can answer that through data. So I think it really speaks to our ability to evolve this function, just show value to organization and kind of figure out how to meet the needs of the business. So we're talking a little bit about tools because we talked about more of a functional level. So just want to talk real quick about just some of the tooling that we're using, kind of current state and kind of where we're trying to get to. So on the left here is kind of talking about our data warehouse. So a lot of the tools we're using have been around even before I started. So when I talked about like 2009, 2010 when we first came in. So we're using a tool called Wordscape Red. It's a tool I've never heard of, and I know very few people who actually know it, but it's what we use for our like very much ETL processes. We're also using SSIS because very few people know Wordscape Red, so it's easier to find people who know SSIS. So those two tools form the base of a lot of our ETL processes. Those feed our data warehouse. So right now we have challenges with our data warehouse because typically it's one essentially node. So a lot of lack of redundancy and points of failure. It's one of those prayers you do every night to make sure, please don't let this thing break on me tonight because I don't want to deal with this tomorrow. And also like Power BI, because Power BI is very much more of a modern tool. So we know that as our backend tools get older and older, we may eventually have problems because Power BI is much more of our focus and these older tools aren't as much. So how do we make sure that we kind of leap forward our technology stack with kind of how we're using Power BI? And the stuff at the bottom right here, that's more like how we link. So like we also send extracts to vendors for benefits. We send data to our analytical teams so they can do more things in Excel, analyze data. So that's kind of on the left with kind of where we're at now. So future state is we're really trying to modernize our environment. Like with our company, we're very much in a growth state with acquisitions and all the different business opportunities. So my sell to the LT was that, you know, if we're a growth business, you need a growth data platform, which we don't have. I mean, the one on the left is really pre-pandemic current business, but one on the right is really trying to get to. So really a truly native Azure platform is what we're currently working on. So how do we modernize our data technology platform? You know, Power BI, of the tools here, really only Power BI is really part of our future, where the rest of it, we're planning to migrate that to kind of get more modern. And I think the key here is that, you know, as we do more for the business and business wants more, we have to have the tools and capabilities to really catch up to where the business wants it to be. And right now we're not there, but we have a plan in place to really modernize everything to get us to, like, you know, if we want to pull Google Analytics data, we don't have to worry about crashing the system because it's too much. Like we can say, okay, let's pull it in and then use it for different customer insights. If we want to pull in data from our ERP system, we can do that. Whereas right now, it's a lot of, we can do that, but it may break a system. We could do that, but everything else will slow down. So really, as we talk about just our self-service analytics, really have to have the actual back-end tool and platform that can continue to service the needs of the organization.
And then when it comes to Microsoft Power BI, so this is the enterprise tool that was selected, as we said, back in 2018. We still use it today, and we've built it out quite a bit. So prior to the pandemic, we were running about 5 apps, which we were very proud of, and maybe 100 reports. And so today, the team actually maintains, builds, and organizes under 40 different department apps. We have over 600 reports at last count, and we're at the point where we are trying to actually downsize, hence the comment, what are you not using? Because we need to make sure that what's in service that you are able to be using. So to give an idea, though, of how we have some of our structure and how we really encourage our teams to talk to one another. So earlier on in the slide deck, we said about our structure. So we have division vice presidents down to a region level, to a district level, run by a district manager, and then the school director. So we have about 100 districts with an average of 10 schools to a district. Why that becomes really important is the way we've structured our reporting that we're very proud of is if I'm a school director, I can see a Power BI report that has just my school information, and the district manager through their Microsoft Power BI app can see their whole district. So we use row-level security to ensure that people are only seeing the data they need to see. That's employee, that's financial, operational, safety. We really do track it all. So when I think about things such as safety, we track observations. So classroom observations, we're tracking, as I already said, the child counts. We're tracking tons of HR metrics, employee satisfaction. And now we're at a point where after really going at this for a year, the data science, the predictive piece is really the next step for our team. So I think what's huge is that we have not, some days it feels like we ran into this, but we really haven't. We've been very methodical on how we've built this out because again, Support Central is around 450 employees. Through the pandemic, we do still have our Novi office, but we actually all have the capability to work remote. So because of that, we're now hiring people all over the country, not just here locally. I have one analyst in Milwaukee, one analyst in Chicago, and then one here in Metro Detroit. So just even learning how to manage the teams and build this has been really interesting because I think a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we didn't see this happening, but we've made it work and it's been pretty phenomenal. Yep.
I think one of the key things here I would say is the last point around just audit and people using it, because I think that's been a huge thing that we frequently talk about is, okay, who's actually using these reports? And even Power BI, that's one of the cool things I like about Power BI is that we even get alerts when if someone's not using a particular report after 2 months, it automatically pauses it. So I used to work at a local hospital, and we had over 3,000 crystal reports. But the problem is you have no way of knowing who's using it, so you kind of just leave it because if you turn it off, you get an angry email. So I think one of the big capabilities I think we've kind of figured out is really just the constant auditing and asking the questions around. It's a lot of support to manage all these apps and reports. So even on the data side, to support the data, to support all this stuff. So who's actually using this stuff? Because that's man hours, it's resources, it's time and effort to maintain all this stuff. So I think the constant asking of who's using this, who's not using it, and turning stuff off if no one's using it, I think has been really critical as well for our success.
Yep, so to that point, how this usually works is Aaron will email me, hey, I got this refresh, pause, and then my team has to go have the awkward conversation about why aren't you using this? And they usually say, well, yeah, I've been using it. And I'm like, wow, we can track that. So are you sure you used it? But thankfully, we have really good relationships with our users, and so they're usually pretty cool about saying why they don't use it. It's been really inspiring to watch the conversations. And the next slide, real quick, is just kind of a snapshot. So I'm all about organization. Anyone who knows and works with me knows that, that's my number one. So if you can imagine 2 years ago, you would see the 5 to 6 apps and that was it. This is just a screenshot of, I think, 10 or 15. This goes all the way down to 40. It's pretty incredible how we've been able to build this, again, through role-level security. Based on who you are, we do fully audit who has access to what groups, who's using what. And it's not about Big Brother is watching, it is about understanding the analytics behind it. Again, we hear so many times, I need this report. And we're like, okay, but it's the flavor of the week today. Is it the flavor of the week next month? And how can we make it useful? And then we do have cross-reporting in different apps based on different departments. So it's pretty cool when we think about it.
Yeah, I think another thing that keeps us organized is that one of our top users, if not our top user of reporting, is the CEO of the company. So him being in here every day, even every hour, really kind of impresses upon us the importance of keeping it clean, keeping the data organized, because we'll get a message from him if something looks off or is not right. So I guess we talked a little bit about the reporting. So I do want to touch on the data catalogs. I think as we think about the concept around self-service, really, business glossary, data lineage are really the big concepts I think are in our industry coming up. And there's a lot of talks around data catalogs. So I originally went to a conference, I think like 2018, thinking about kind of the concept. But I think at the time, the tools kind of weren't there. It's like there were tools out there, but either there was a high price tag or we didn't have enough trust and credibility in the business to actually go after some of these tools because it was a high cost and we had to kind of justify that. So it's one of those concepts that have been out there, but I think really when we got in the pandemic and talked with our ELT about forming our teams, that's when actually our ELT was the one that said, okay, we're at the point where data governance is huge, glossary terms, auditing terms, signing off on business terms is really important. So actually it was our CFO that was really the big driver of, hey, go out there, figure out a data catalog that we can use in our organization. So starting in August 2020, myself, Kristin, and then our senior director of BI really kind of formed kind of a sub-team to really go out there and try to find a data catalog tool. So I think what we did was we took like a Gartner Magic Quadrant of all the data catalog providers. It was like 25. So what we did, we split it up, and each of us talked to all of them. Half of them respond, half of them don't respond, so that whittled it down. Of those, some of them you talk to them like, no thanks, didn't like that person, so we whittled it down. So really, it was really a fun kind of project from August, I think, until about October when we kind of paused it. But it was really kind of a fun 2 to 3 months to really look at kind of what the needs of the business were to identify kind of data catalog providers. So really, we got it down to 3 final vendors. Then we did more due diligence to do like demos. We talked to references. So we did a full due diligence process. We showed it to our executive team to kind of give them our recommendations. They pushed back and kind of gave us some things to think about. So it was really a full due diligence process to kind of select the data catalog. We ended up selecting a company called Data.World. So they're actually a cloud native data catalog, which is one of our key requirements, just because I don't want to have yet another product I had to manage. So we ended up picking a cloud native solution called Data Catalog out of 3 total vendors. So that was a selection. So really kind of had to go through some hurdles because as the pandemic was happening, we had to manage our spend. So it was kind of, we had to sit on it. So really January is when we kind of made the final selection. And then the technical setup was around February. So there were some kind of, in order to tunnel to our environment to actually pull up our metadata. So there was some actual technical setup to set up the catalog, set up security, set up some basic structure. So that took us a couple months to really figure out those components. And then we start to work with actual teams. So once we had the catalog built, it was actually now that it's populated. So we had to learn iteratively how to actually build a catalog because it's not like something we've done in the past. So what makes a good business term? What makes a glossary term? What makes a good definition? How do you meet with the business to actually get sign off on definitions so that it makes sense? So that's something that we really started working on, last summer and, just kind of finished up the first initial kind of definitions with some of our core users.
And so earlier this spring, what we decided on after many iterations of like what a process could look like is now we have to actually get this catalog off the ground. So it's one thing to go through all the process. It's another thing to have it in a system. But one of the reasons we chose Data.World is they have a company culture we feel very similar to ours, and they also really drive engagement. They've been with us every step of the way, and it's been really cool to watch, but also sometimes pretty scary because we're like, okay, we got to do this. So what we did was my team leveraged one of our partnerships, which was actually HR. A lot of people we found who do have catalogs are going with a finance or an operations or maybe a marketing. And we pivoted and we said, nope, let's start with HR. So we went to HR, we used our conversations and our trust and our partnership, and we built out the catalog. And so where we're at today is we have about 400 terms in the catalog. We're pretty excited about that. But that's actually mostly HR, a little bit of finance, a little bit of operations, and a tiny bit of marketing. So we often get asked, how big is this thing going to go? And we thought in the beginning maybe 1,000 terms. We now easily think we'll probably have 2,000 at some point, and we'll never be done. We also intend to catalog all of our data warehouse tables, and then we also want to catalog our Power BI reports. So the end use case is ultimately, if I am a user and I'm looking at a Power BI report and I'm trying to understand what in the world this terminology is or what reporting tables it came from, whether I am an analyst of some sort, I'm a school director at a school, it is leveling the playing field. Everybody has the same access to the same language and the same lingo. And so utilizing HR, I think we were all really blown away with how excited HR got about it. It's been really cool to just watch. They call me quite a few times a day. Kristin, I tried to find this term. You don't have it in there yet. Okay, let me think. Okay, we can get it. But why that's important is next month we will be rolling it out to all of HR. And then shortly after, we will be rolling it out to, I would predict, we're thinking July, it may be August, September now, 200 users at Support Central. Our goal is within 6 months, everybody at Support Central will have access to the catalog. Then we'll roll it out to our district managers, division vice presidents, region managers, and finally our directors. And we would predict we will have around 2,000 users in our data catalog in the next 18 months. And so it's been just a really cool project to watch grow. There's definitely been some growing pains, but we're really excited just in watching one business unit, the conversations and how it's changed the way people think. And at the end of the day, we're an education company. And so it makes sense to have a tool that provides and helps leverage our own education when we challenge each other in how we talk.
Yeah, and I also add, it's been a great just communication tool. So like, because Kristin and my teams work together so closely, you know, we're not getting any younger, so I forget things, right? So a lot of times, you know, meetings where, hey, what's this definition, or why we do it this way? At a certain point, you know, you start with Microsoft Word trying to document terms. We tried Excel, you try OneNote, but this really helps the communication where as we're building things, we can actually have a artifact to write it down or, you know, write down these little notes so that it kind of sits there. So anytime we have to go back to remember why we did something or if they have to ask a question, I can first say, you know, instead of scheduling multiple meetings, like let's check the catalog first to see if the definition's there. If it's there, it helps have better conversations versus, hey, what's that definition? Because a lot of times we also meet with ELT and they see a report and they ask us, okay, where's this metric and what's the definition? And we try to explain it and they just don't understand it, right? 'Cause, you know, some people are visual, some people are audit, you know, imagery. So I think this really has helped us really have a great communication tool to talk about data, to talk about the business with both technical and non-technical folks. And I think it's had some very great discussions. We talked with our CEO about it, our CFO has seen it. So a lot of different people we've kind of talked about our organization just to see just the capability and to be able to have a lot more questions and answer a lot more questions. Especially if we talk about just a self-service functionality. I think this was one of the big tools to really having a great self-service function.
And so for our last slide, Aaron and I, when we were building this presentation, jokingly, we started to brainstorm all the words that create around the lessons we've learned. And I think we can sum up this slide by simply saying it's been a lot. It has been a lot to get to this point, but to watch how the organization really understands data, I think one of the best things that happens, at least on a weekly basis, is I usually get a call from a school director that goes, I understood a report, and that's actually what we need. We can't just create a report that is out there. We want to make sure people are empowered to use it. A lot of times our user base was scared to click in Power BI, and much of it was just us saying, you can click. We control it. You can click. I promise we can get you back. And to get over that hurdle, because I think sometimes we go to, oh, we've made it easier for them, but we forget that sometimes technologies make it scary for other people. And so to watch the dialogue and the conversation, to watch our teams grow, the partnership, the trust, it has been a really, really cool journey, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, I think the big ones here is like evolution. Like 2 years ago, we started with a idea in mind, and then life happens, and we're at a very good point today. I'm always amazed, like when Kristin says, almost 400 terms, like that's amazing just to think about how we went from an idea or a charter from our executive team to actually building out a catalog, setting it up, setting up definitions. Like it's just been a great partnership. Something that we encourage folks to really just kind of, as we think about just the self-service journey of how these functions work together? How do we grow? And just all around, just how do you provide value to organization? Because at the end of the day, you work in data, it's all about providing value to organization and to the business. So definitely a lot of fun. Like you said, it's a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So we're not done in any way, shape, or form. So a lot more challenges and fun times to be had. So.
All right, and with that, no one fell asleep. So is there any questions?
How many data sources are you connecting to or ERPs, and what are you guys doing with the match merge cleansing of kind of common things that are not common?
Great question. So the number of data sources, I mean, I haven't really counted. I think probably like 10 to 15. We know we have our POS system where we do our revenue from. We have an HR system, ERP system, marketing system. So I would say probably an order of 10 to 15. We've actually started to, when we think about data quality, I think a lot of that should live in the source system. So it's been a challenge, but we really tried to push back on kind of the producers and say, like, it's garbage in, garbage out. So, we're just showing you what's in these systems. So if you have if there's issues with kind of data quality or these records don't make sense, then we need to have a conversation with the application friends. Say, okay, it's an application issue, maybe not. Or it's, the people who put the data in the system talk about processes and why that looks a certain way. So we tried to minimize the amount of data cleansing rules, like on our side, on the data side, just because you end up with like this huge spider web of logic, and all of a sudden someone leaves, you have no idea what all this logic means. So we've tried our best to really just have the reporting and data reflect the source system. And so it's really conversation on the front end side to say, okay, if you guys are putting this data in this way, it's going to end up bad. I mean, examples are HR system where, we show hourly wage rates. So somebody put a $4,500 hourly rate versus $45, all of a sudden you're going to see a pretty high wage labor rate that's going to cause some questions about that. So the resolution to that is really go back to the sources and say, okay, HR, somebody put in the wrong wage rate, you guys got to fix it. Like, we're not fixing this stuff for you guys because that's just an endless web of just being hard to support that. Answer your question? Okay.
Any other questions?
All right, I'll get one more.
Yeah.
How do you fight the battle between people wanting it delivered through email versus go get it themselves?
All right, I'll take this one. I think it goes back to it has been a 2-year process to build the trust and the relationships. Sometimes I often say, like, we're just going to go grassroots. Like, and if that's me or someone on my team, calling them and saying, share your screen, I'm going to show you how to go do it. It's the empowerment to get them there. I find often that we can put it in a memo. We can tell you this new report is available. We can tell you where to go get it. Sometimes you just have to call and show them that they can do it. That empowerment has been huge in our learning. And sometimes I sit there and I think, really, that's all it took. But it's huge because sometimes our users do not want to admit that they don't know how to do it. And yes, my answer to them is usually, you're right. It's easy for you to go to your email, but let me tell you about the audit that brings up. Let me tell you about the issues that could potentially bring. And if you're going to be meeting with your team, they all have access to the same information and you can all get it together. And so it's a lot of that foundation that's been really important.
And I would say real quick, just core principles. Like, it's a line in the sand of these are the things we do, and these things that we just don't do. So it's we do allow for this or we don't allow for that, and just really standing firm with those concepts.
Ultimately, how many folks are you going to enable with self-service?
So when we say we have 21,000 employees, we don't have our teachers using our systems only because they're in the classrooms. So we often say it's about 2,500. So it would be the school directors, so they really become the champion at a school. An average school has a staff of 25 to 30, just to kind of give that context there. Then all of Support Central, and then all of our field leadership. So about 2,500.
So out of those 2,500 people, how many are building the dashboard and using Power BI?
So when it comes to building the dashboards, it's really just my team. We really are small but mighty. We do have some users within like finance, for instance, who will build things, or we've built something for them that they may update because it's specific for them. But to bring like an audit and a collaboration to it, it really is a team of 5. And then a lot of times we'll leverage Aaron's team if we need assistance in getting something done.
So it sounds like you pretty heavily audit like account reports being used and such. How do you handle like bad reports, for example, that have maybe fallen out of use, like a large part, in many cases, because the users, so some of the primary users of that report have maybe moved on to different roles or something like that. So it's kind of just gone invisible. Someone doesn't know it exists. How do you maybe handle that? Do you out or what's the?
Yep, so it's not glamorous, but we have a quarterly audit. So what happens is, and it's a collaboration between the 2 teams. So someone on Aaron's team sends my team a list of everybody in our Power BI group. So we usually do a Power BI group for every app, for the most part, for security. And then it's real old school. We got an Excel sheet. We just go through and we say, we do have an app owner to every business unit. So for instance, the controller of accounting, she owns the accounting app. And so we send it to her and we say, are these people all in use? So again, it's all about partnership.
Phil, just so you know, the session's over and your 15-minute break is happening. But if you want to stay, these are great questions. But we want to let those that want to leave to get to the next session, take a little break before you get there, go ahead and do that. Those that want to stay, remain, ask questions, feel free to do so. And you guys will be here to field some more questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.